that are up. Excellent. Excellent. But I wanted to also reflect on change, and change in terms of how it reflects who you are as individuals and organizations, but also how it impacts who we are. Charles pointed out that this building that was built in 1910, that sleigh in the back of the room was built in 1910. It is no longer useful. The building is very useful. How do we make sure that those things we're doing and thinking about are sustainable? How do we make sure that the world we're in now we can adapt to, because it is changing? And that's really the essence of tonight's conversation, is to begin to talk about the positive things and then some really subtle pieces that I picked up as I try to maintain my optimism in this market. So we're going to go through the presentation. I encourage you to interrupt, and then we'll reflect at the end over what's coming before us. So when we talked about the headline, this was why many of you were here. What's life after the big, beautiful bill? The headlines are solar's gone. The headlines are we pulled away all the incentives. Those are true headlines. But let's dig a little deeper and find out where we're going and why we can be optimistic. We spent a little bit of time on who we are. This happens to be our firm at a seminar at Rodale Institute, who's one of our clients. We're helping them take their campus and become even more sustainable with an array that will offset all of their electric usage, both now and for the new building they're working on. That's where you are. That's where we all started 26 years ago, in a little farmhouse just on the other side of the mountain that now has had an adaptive reuse change and is now an Airbnb. That's a little bit about us. This is about where we are. There's a lot here. When I called to get permission to use the graphic, I got him on the first bounce, Mr. Reed. And he said, please, use it all the time. Do it, use it wherever you want. I said, well, that's very kind of you, because there's so much here. It's not only the trajectory of change, but it's also the trajectory of demand. We are demanding more as citizens, as clients, as businesses, of the people we buy services from. We're asking the right questions. We're having subtle market shifts that are becoming more regenerative. But it all began a long time ago when being less red was all we needed to do to be more green. See that subtlety? That's a very, very subtle shift. It used to be less red was more green, and now more green becomes more regenerative. That's an important piece. When you think about the role that this nation, this world has been on, that's where we're headed. And where do I think we are? I think we're in here somewhere. I think if you look at where LEED was, LEED helped us become less red. There isn't much LEED in our worlds anymore. And I'm remiss in not introducing my colleagues who decided to spend their evening with us. Margaret, who helped with the presentation, Roger, who works in the firm, and Cassie, who's probably letting people in the door downstairs. But I think this is where we are. I think there's still room to go. And again, I'm optimistic because this isn't just policy. These are people like you making choices. So we're going to talk about 4 reasons why I'm optimistic. Keep going. So if we plan better, we will do better. It seems so easy. It seems so straightforward. But I can't tell you how many institutions we go to that are just going to plop a new building down, and they plop it down without the proper solar orientation. We had this for a big 25,000 square foot facility out in Moxitani Township just the other day. If you turn the building a little bit, if you plan a little harder, you can get there. And we've got great planning tools, and we're beginning to see that decarbonization requires better planning. We've got better tools, but we've forgotten about some of them. We've forgotten that it's okay to conserve. It's okay to turn the thermostat off. Well, unless you're in my house and I attach the geofence to my phone, which means When I'm away, the energy is off. We had to make an adjustment at home to make sure that her phone was on the geofence. But we've got technology that's helping us remember to conserve. Efficiency is second nature. Renewables, we all understand. Electrification is a byproduct of all those things. When we move those forward, we decarbonize. When we decarbonize, we build a better building. We're building it for the future. And we'll look to explain why that happens. There's a lot to utility and carbon master planning. If you go to your typical builder, whether it be for a house or for an office building or for an addition, I think the industry is behind and the consumer needs to push the industry forward. When that happens, we can build a better building. There are tools that help us, and we'll begin to share some of those. But it happens in the planning phase, and it happens before we just forget to ask a lot of questions. We can make it really complicated, but remember, data is at the beginning. When we go and we do a design review and the engineer doesn't know what the rate structure looks like, doesn't know what the cost per kW is versus the cost per kWh, doesn't understand what the ratchets mean. There are ratchets in Connecticut, for example, where you'll pay your highest peak energy for the next 13 months. There are things in the tariffs that are very, very complex. One person in the room knows more about this than I do, and that's Phil. But it all begins with data and planning, and it begins with understanding that what we do over here may well have a different answer because of incentives over here. Those incentives still exist. And when we layer all these things together and we do something a little bit different, we can become more sustainable. If you're a university and you're on steam, it's 100% clear that no one's going to build a steam heating system driven by steam in this day and age. So the question for the big institutions is, how do they make that change? And the answer is very carefully. It's by planning. It's by thinking about moving your buildings to low temperature hot water, even if you haven't disconnected from steam, because someday you will disconnect from steam. And I'm not saying steam's bad. It's just old and it's not very efficient. We can talk a little bit more about that. But when these things come together, we end up doing something that's easier and better. And we've got lots of tools for benchmarking, whether it be the EPA's Energy Star program or Portfolio Manager. There was some conversation that those were going to be taken away. They have not been taken away yet. Energy Star is a very powerful joint effort between EPA and DOE. Those benchmarking components allow us to understand how our buildings compare. Next slide. Putting it all together is like a puzzle. We've got utility infrastructure. We need to make sure we're reducing base load. We've got our eye on our emissions components. There are a number of organizations that actually tax their planning effort with a shadow price of carbon. Not a real price of carbon, just a carbon sensitivity analysis. Princeton's really good at it. Swarthmore did it. Haverford's thinking about it. The UN does it in some of its plannings. There are colleges that are beginning to think about evaluating master plan scenarios based on total carbon embodied and operational. But when we begin to think about how we pull all these things together, it's a little bit like a puzzle. So we can drive costs down. Here's how we're going to do it. Everyone believes a megawatt. A megawatt is the watt you didn't use. It's not a concept I coined. I've heard it, but I appreciate it because the negawatt is now big enough to replace the investment tax credit on electricity. Because if we were giving a 30% investment tax credit at both the residential and commercial level, and if your rates have now gone up 30%, you can still use less electricity or replace it with renewable and do it in a way that is more cost effective. I took these slides when I was at Energy Path. I think it's a great conference. SEF puts it on. It's usually at DeSales. It's in July, and I took them at a PPL presentation. And what it's saying was the experts got it wrong because they didn't understand the growth of data centers, and data centers were causing the demand curve, and this was the spot market for, that's load growth. That load growth was causing the spot market for demand to go up tenfold. That's how in big industrial consumers, in effect, pay for some of their demand control or demand response components, is in future monies created by being able to curtail. That curve is outrageous. It's driven by these green dots. So this is PPL's territory. And again, PPL was making the presentation. I was taking pictures of it. Fascinating. These green dots are all little data centers that are cropping up. That's what's causing that line to go out of control. And that's what's causing all power prices to go out of control. So that tax incentive that was 30%, your rates are now up 30% or will be up 30% and certainly will grow greater than the rate of CPI for the foreseeable future. That means if you're good now, the spread gets better over time. Right? If you can have parity now, and we know the levelized cost of energy in general has reached or come below grid pricing, that spread in our mind will continue to grow, and you can do it without the ITC. Here's a little bit more what's happening in this area. The Eli Lilly piece was just announced. We've got Tier Point, we've got the former and ever since I did this slide, we've also looked at data centers down in LVIP right as you come off 78 and 412. There are data centers everywhere. And they're not, in fact, being regulated at a national level, let alone a local level. And there are some creative components there, but the bottom line here is that Bloomberg News is saying 267% more for a single month. That maybe that's an exaggeration, but my point is power is up and it's going to continue to go up until there's a dramatic breakthrough in technology. And that's not my area of expertise. I follow it to a degree, but there are some signs of hope on the way. This is an eye test, and all I'm going to do is show you that we are getting better because the grid in Pennsylvania is getting better. It's about 25% better over the last 10 years. So if you electrify, you become 25% cleaner over that period of time. Even if you did nothing locally and didn't do anything in your house, the grid has gotten cleaner. Policy is working. Even in a place like Pennsylvania that's a little bit slow to react, the grid is cleaner and it's projected to get even cleaner than that. So in places like Connecticut, they're lagging. They haven't had the same experience. The prices are way up. The megawatt is more valuable. So the grid is important to understand in terms of how we lower cost, in terms of how we lower carbon. So we go to eGrid to get our data. This is 2023. And then I think we were 10 years before that gave us the math. Next slide. So it is true. It has gone away. But it's not that hard. It's gone away in 2 steps. The first step is if you are safe harbored 5% of not the soft cost, but the hard cost associated with an array, you have 4 years from July 4th to install the system. Okay? It's causing our office to be very busy. It means any one of you could call a solar installer and say, I need to safe harbor a project between now and whenever you can install it, and you still can get that 30%. Okay? That's good for institutions. It's good for individuals. And remember, the IRA made the direct pay provision happen, which meant that a not-for-profit could also get the tax credit even though they weren't paying taxes. As long as they were filing their 990s and following their 501c requirements, they were able to take advantage of that tax credit. That created less friction because now you didn't have to have a PPA with a tax equity provider who wasn't going to give you the full value of the ITC anyways, and now you'd be at a higher cost of funds than most institutions can finance. So this really drove it forward. That has not been taken away either. There is a second provision of the ITC sunsetting that is less appealing. And it says that if you miss the safe harbor date, you then have a year to get it installed. And if you don't get it operational, you're out of luck. I don't like that. There's too much risk in approval. There's too much risk to do that. So in our minds, in our company, we've said any projects we have that are ready to go by this July 4th and that we can buy 5% of the project, that's a good safe people. And I've had boards say to me, yeah, but will Trump administration pull it back? Maybe, but they've already changed it. They've moved on to other things. So all of the advice we see is that the ITC is sunsetting. We've got this window of time right now that's working. And if you don't hit it, you can still feel okay because your rates are going to be up 30%. If you can get it right now, obviously it's good. Get it ahead of the curve. And again, that long period of time, 4 years for solar installers is an eternity. They're very excited to do it. And we have not seen prices go up as a result of that forced demand because the sunset period is so long. You can tell I'm excited about this. I'll take questions on this part right now because it's a little tricky, but it leaves us 3 months of optimism for any projects that you have in your head that need to get launched. Anything from online?
I was going to say, how far do you have to be with the project?
You have to have paid 5%. And let's say you pay 6 or 7% just to be safe.
It all has to be planned out so you know what 5% is.
All have to be planned out. You can say, I'm going to do it on my roof, and I think I'm going to have a 40 kW system. That's going to be $2 a watt. That's 80,000.
I think I now have it.
So you don't have to have it all.
I'll try to do better next time. Okay.
Nice talking. Carson. Okay.
So it doesn't have to be totally planned out. It's the federal government saying this is when we're going to give you your tax payment. All your local approvals and all those things are not contingent on launching the project. The test is the 5% safe harbor.
It's still for residential,
Yes.
but it's been sunset last year. No.
No. So that's. Go ahead.
If someone had signed a contract recently to get solar panels installed on their residence, can they still do the safe harbor thing, or is that too late?
I want to follow up on that because I'm 95% certain that the rules are the same for businesses and individuals. Let me check that.
Yeah.
For businesses, for sure. For not-for-profits, for sure. Okay, keep going. This one, so the only change that we saw for the tax credits I just talked about were on December 31st, a new provision was put in place that said we had to adhere to FIAC, that is foreign entities of concern, and that the FIAC provisions needed to make sure that your panels weren't coming, your total percentage of your work wasn't coming from a place of concern. Of all the projects we've done, everyone's met that concern. That was the only other new rule superimposed after the big, beautiful bill. What we are seeing, still eligible, should be in green highlights at the end. Elective pay, that's what I call directive pay, geo exchange, and fiat compliant batteries, fuel cells, and CHP. Those things haven't been touched, yet the headline is we pulled it all away. We pulled away the tax credits. The geo exchange is incredibly powerful. It works really well in Pennsylvania, and the credits flow in the same way, but they're not under that safe harbor provision. That sunset period is 5 or 6 years down the road. And when you do that, it's 30% not of just the geo exchange system, it's 30% of all of the related things that helped you put the geo exchange system in. So the wiring of the pumps, the design costs, the general conditions, you can take a chunk of all of those pieces. So when you take your 30%, it's on a bigger number than what the HVAC subcontract is. It's on all those other related soft costs, effectively making the discount closer to 40 or 50%. When that happens, your geo exchange now has better first cost and better operating cost. We built a better building for less money and will operate it for less money. That's where GeoExchange really works. It doesn't work on all building types, doesn't work in all locations. It doesn't work, it depends. You know, solar is very consistent. GeoExchange will depend a lot on the particular circumstances. But this is now our main tool going forward. And oh, by the way, we haven't seen cost there. We're still seeing more investment. We're still seeing the heat pumps associated with it become more efficient. We're seeing new technology emerge in terms of how we're turbocharging that exchange that's taking place deep down, 300-400 feet down. There's new technology. There's a company called Darcy out of the Midwest that's doing some work in that area. I saw their installation at Carleton College in Minnesota. So that's the big, beautiful bill. It's not the end. It's got a little bit of a gentle shutdown, and GeoExchange was not touched. So if you can think of the investment tax credits as having changed the solar market and created that lower levelized cost of energy, we believe that GeoExchange the same thing will happen, that it will become more common. Okay. Phil, you'll let me know if anyone's got questions online. Thank you. This is the solar stool. I'm talking about Pennsylvania in general, but there are a couple things, there are a couple states that still have their own incentives that stack on top of the federal. New Jersey is one of them. That SREC market in New Jersey is really, really strong. It's stated about 100. It has 15-year commitment. That's a 15-year strip, as we call it, that says for 15 years, you're going to get a commitment from the state, in effect, to pay $100 in SREC. That's 10 cents a kilowatt hour. When we convert from value of SRECs to kilowatt hours, that means that renewable attribute is worth half of the price of the energy in New Jersey. Getting it for 15 years, this is all buying down the cost. So in New Jersey, it's a little different because the costs are about double than Pennsylvania in round numbers, but you're getting this extra effort. Connecticut's a little bit different. Connecticut, the incentives have been so strong that they're now inverted, and you pay for the privilege of net metering. So that's how the market has changed. But that 5% that you're paying, that 5 cents a kilowatt hour, that's greater than 5%, in Connecticut, the rates have gone up so much that it's still okay to do. Because you now got 25% power, you got to pay another 5 to get it to have permission, but your levelized cost of energy is 10 cents. Now you're paying 15 cents. You're still roughly half the cost for electricity in Connecticut if you do this type of project. But it's competitive. Not everyone can get it. Every state's a little different. New York's a little different. Massachusetts a little different. Washington, D.C., really, really good. That SREC value I talked about in New Jersey, it's 4 times higher in Washington, D.C. $400. And we forget that the cost system continues to go down, and we're not even getting that bump as we finish the end of the ITC because of that long runway. So we haven't seen a price increase. We continue to see price going down in terms of the components and the labor that go into what we call is the cost per watt to install. Next slide. This is exciting. We used to have sustainability that was sprinkled on top. You take a standing seam metal roof and you'd put in solar panels. Well, the emerging technology has now moved to building integrated photovoltaics. This project right here is at McGill. It's a school we're working on in Virginia. And we looked at whether we could sprinkle it on by adding some solar panels on the standing seam roof on the south elevation. We were going to make about 40 kW. By using this product and covering the entire roof, we're able to make 200 kW. And we're able to make it with an ROI of about 7 years after the tax credit. It wouldn't work so well without the tax credit in Virginia because we got 16-cent power. Right? In Virginia, 16-cent power. Right? So this we get excited about. This is a European product that has a US distributor. They've been great to work with. And in effect, we're launching into that next era. We've had some bad starts in this. We've had thin film, we had Cylindra, we had some other things that didn't work. This one is 10 years, good history in Europe. They're bringing the panels here. And oh, by the way, where they're made in Estonia is not a FIAC problem. So this is a short-term opportunity and a long-term play that says maybe it doesn't work in Pennsylvania right away, but it's going to work in Connecticut. It's going to work in New Jersey. It's going to work where the power rates are heavy. And it's going to work when you can fix your costs now and then assume that the power cost is going to go up over time. This is a very exciting product to us, and it's really a shift that is not just here, but it's a subtle shift in the technology improvements we have that can help us do a better job in terms of optimism after the big, beautiful bill. Distributed generation.
Roof fit, that solar, what type of product is that then? Does that go still on top of a,
It's totally built in, meaning
is the roof?
it is the roof. So now we've actually saved. Thank you for your question, because now we've actually saved because we didn't have to have the metal roof where the panel was and overlapping it and doing two things. We've now got the PV itself doing the work of the metal roof.
Nice.
Pretty cool, pretty different. And again, go on their website. That is the website. Roofit.solar is the website. The US distributor is arcedgepower.com. So exciting product. And this is 3 hours from here. They've got, I don't think they have one in Pennsylvania yet. So distributed generation, CHP, sometimes we call it batteries, maybe it's a generator on demand response. But this is a way to save money. We're seeing it happen at the casino. We're seeing it happen at institutions. We're seeing it happen in batteries in Connecticut where we've got that ratchet and high demand costs. We're seeing battery providers saying, yes, we can do a battery, no cost to the consumer. These are institutions that are burning a million kilowatt hours. But they still got a demand profile that a small battery will conquer. And all of a sudden, we're beginning to help the entire grid by smoothing it out, either with CHP or batteries in ways that make sense. In Pennsylvania, residentially, it doesn't make any sense. Financially, it may make a lot of sense if you've got a lot of blips, but it's not going to work financially because we don't have a demand charge on our residential meters. And we don't have a lot of demand charge even on our commercial meters. So this is a strategy for other places that pay much more for their energy. But it's real and it's still getting that federal benefit. That's part of the rule that hasn't gone away. So batteries are now real in most places besides PA. There are places in PA that can still do a demand side generator, a tier 4 driven propane or natural gas generator, and make money on it and add to their resiliency because the markets are paying for the ability to have spinning reserve, to have capacity, to have capital that's ready to be called into action when the grid is peaking. They're willing to pay a lot of money for that. And that whole market is getting more evolved and more sophisticated. We're seeing a lot more interest in it.
If I understand what you just said, this concept is, and batteries more generally are not attractive in Pennsylvania because we typically lack time of use charges. Is that, that's not what you said, but that's how I interpreted it.
So it is what I meant to say, but there are exceptions to what I was really talking about. Your general service meters and your residential meters don't have much demand charge. The residential, none, no time of day, typically. On a building like this, we've got a small demand charge at $6. In Connecticut, you've got a demand charge of $25, and then there's a ratchet associated with it. So when you're below, you're still paying the high demand charge in general. But there's also a whole strategy here when we talked about planning that says, in this market, maybe we want to be more distributed. Maybe we want to go back to thinking locally. Maybe we want to go back to having our own small little mini power plants. Maybe we want to think about having more local energy and using batteries to flatten out the curve, whether it be a chomp digester or a solar array or a windmill. The batteries are now allowing us the tools to think differently about our site and source energy. And the graphic here is saying electricity between site and source is roughly 3 times more carbon associated with source energy than site energy. I think I inverted that. So when you actually use the electricity in your home, you have your site is 3 times higher than your source because we've lost it in transmission, we've lost it in creation of the electricity. So this whole notion that we want to get back to small distributed generation, we want to get back to local work, makes sense from a planning perspective. Anecdotal story. In Bethlehem, in the historic quarter, is the first municipal water pump. And it used water to pump water uphill to cisterns so that it could be the first water system in this country. And it was using renewable energy. It was using pump energy from the hydro flow to pump the water up the hill to the cistern. Right here, you can go see the wheel right in the industrial quarter. Pretty cool. Next slide. So lowering EDUI is energy use intensity. That's an important component. It's important that we all talk in that language. It means that we're taking all the BTUs, whether it be in oil or gas or electricity, and we're combining them into one place and saying, we just want to have less energy, and less energy means less carbon. Well, the type of energy does matter too, and that's where we're really moving to electrification. Electricity is incredibly efficient in terms of reducing EUI. Next slide. So there's nothing wrong with passive house principles. As a matter of fact, everything is right with them. It's common sense. But this structure is beginning to get a lot of traction. And when I went back to that property we were talking about doing the planning for in Moxitani Township, passive house principles were first and foremost. Let's orient the building correctly. Let's create a tight envelope. Let's have efficient systems. Let's use air exchange that we can control rather than infiltration, which we can't control. Let's build a controlled environment. And when we do that, we get to EUI typically about 20. That's really, really good for a commercial building. This building's probably 60 or 70 EUI. So our new buildings can be even better. And passive house is one way to do it. And there are passive house certifications. You can do that. It involves blower tests. It involves all those things. But much like LEED, you can take the good ideas and you can apply them in a way that makes sense. And if there is a passive house certified building at Muhlenberg, I believe is one, and that's it right there. Thermal resiliency is a little bit more complicated, but we do see 70% energy savings. And that's going to have high payback because the rates are up. Air source heat pumps have come a long, long way. I can't tell you how many people have said, they don't work when it gets really cold out. Not true anymore. It's just not true. They don't work as efficiently, but they work, and they work particularly well if you've built a good envelope. We don't necessarily like them in a building that hasn't been retrofitted and doesn't have thermal breaks and doesn't have good windows because the heat pumps are generally at the core. They're not in a perimeter system. But if you're building new, why wouldn't you want to do this? This COP can be very confusing. I'll make it simple. COP is coefficient of performance. If you see 3 or 5, that's 300 to 500% more efficient than 1. So that's the magic of a heat pump. When we put energy into a boiler, an atmospheric boiler, we get about 80% out. If we put it into a condensing boiler, we get about 90% out. If we put it into a heat pump, not only do we not have any transmission losses or distribution losses because the heat pump's typically at the room where you need it, or its distribution is very efficient. If it's not at that room, we're at 300 to 500% efficient. Well, how's that happen? That's magic. Ask Margaret.
A question about air source heat pumps. You mentioned your enthusiasm for geo-exchange, and I have heard at times people say, well, heat pumps, air source heat pumps are so good these days that it's hard to make a case for geo-exchange. Have you heard that? And what?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the dual. That's the dual you want to set up. You want to look at the life cycle cost. You want to look at the first cost. In general, a house, maybe there is no general comment, But those are the two that are going to vie for each other. But oftentimes we're seeing the geo exchange is forgetting about the tax credits. And then when you do that, it might go from second place to first place. That's what we're seeing. But those are the two choices. And remember, they're all both good at air conditioning and heating. As a matter of fact, you want them to do that because it makes them more efficient. And I can't think that you'd build a building now without air conditioning. But first cost can be very good because the same equipment's doing both things. So everything goes back to where are you with utility rate? Remember the utility blue in the middle. What does your rate structure look like? Where's it headed to? And then what are your incentives? And then make your right choice. So the answer to the question is those are the two most likely candidates. But maybe if you're a little bigger, maybe there's some CHP. Certainly there could be some solar. But that's exactly where we want the conversation to go.
Question. Yeah, dual window heat pumps. Have you done anything with them?
Then I haven't seen a window one that doesn't have an envelope problem, right? So you're creating that infiltration there, and that's going to throw the model off, in my mind.
Okay.
Okay, good stuff. We're not going to keep you here all night. If you take one thing away, geothermal is when you go way down in the deep crust of the earth and you get hot stuff out and you make electricity with it. Geo-exchange is what we think of and we often call geothermal. It's like early on in the days of Leeds, you had people calling it Leeds, which is a city in England. Geo-exchange is the right word for what we think of as geothermal. So get rid of geothermal unless you're interested in drilling down 4,000, 5,000, 10,000 feet. At least
That one.
for geothermal.
Okay.
Geo exchange 400 feet.
Yeah, 46.
Yeah. So we've got new technology that's helping us. And again, talking both residentially and commercial, there's nothing wrong with the Nest thermostat. As a matter of fact, there's a lot right with it because it learns over time. Even if you don't program it, it gets better. Most of our systems aren't that way. InOcean is a small controller. It's a small player in a big market that's causing some of the big entities, Siemens, Johnson, Honeywell, begin to think differently. Or I shouldn't say they're beginning to think differently. This is like transformative because we're now taking sophisticated controllers that are little teeny chips and they're self-learning and they're making our buildings smarter, much like a Nest makes our house smarter. And how's it doing that? Well, it's doing it because it's undercutting the cost. The cost of doing a typical BAS, building automation system, might be $5, $6 a square foot. Here we're seeing a fraction of that, and really it's a fixed cost because they're so efficient and so easy to install. Not a lot of programming. They connect, they play nicely with all the other smart devices that are out there. So very exciting technology that gives us the ability to do more. So this happens to be one that we're putting in at Central Moravian Church. There you go. And it falls on the heels of installation of a VRF system there with DOAS units. And the DOAS units and the VRF system weren't necessarily talking to each other to become more efficient. The InOcean controller is doing that. And we're at $10,000 compared to about $30,000 to have installed it with a BAS system. That makes it payback. So these are some of the things that we have that help us do better work because it can automate the demand control ventilation. They're wireless and easy to connect. They're smart. They learn along with you. It's just fascinating.
Can you give us a definition of BAS?
Sorry, building automation system.
Oh.
Anytime I use an acronym, I can get wound up. Just throw a flag. Building automation system, sometimes called ATC, automatic temperature control system. It's the systems that run our campuses typically. So bigger buildings. Okay, know the market. The market's shifting. And how you know the market means that we're into the final chapter and we'll keep on time. So there are places. If you're bored and you want to go to imt.org, you can see this map. IMT is intermodal transportation, I think. But it keeps track of all the places that have policies that are causing you to do good things. And sometimes it's better to do good things on your own. Sometimes it's okay that we're seeing market shifts. But this is the difference. There is market shift. There is momentum. Whether it be in State College, or whether it be in Pittsburgh, or whether it be New York, Philly, Washington, Montgomery County, all have pretty stringent components. Boston does too. There's stretch code in Massachusetts that is exactly that. It's stretching us to get better. But the world is changing. And as that happens, it's causing us to build better buildings. And if we could do it financially attractive, so much better. Next slide. New York City is really, really complicated. But if you're in New York, you're following all these local laws, and the local laws are beginning to have an impact because they were put in place as many as 10 years ago, when now they're coming to terms, meaning that the rules start with benchmarking, you go to tune-up, you go to commissioning, you go to reporting, and then you go to the Climate Mobilization Act, which now has penalties.
Penalties if you don't do it.
Correct. Correct. So in New York, we have caps. The light bars are amount of emissions, and we were just sort of pepping along. They gave a little step down in 2026, and then we jump along until 2029, and then look at that. The amount of permitted emissions go from 563 to 186. And when that threshold happens, you're getting, these are your penalty payments. Okay, these are going to force change in these municipalities. This happens to be New York. I have not seen anything that says it's being recalled. So we are getting to be optimistic about sustainability because there are some local municipalities. None of you work in California too much, but there's some rules out there too. This is right here. It's right nearby. It's more stringent than Washington or Philly. And we're looking at 2030 as being the cliff when you've got to be ready. So a firm like ours is interested in working in New York because these people are all becoming more sustainable because they're being forced to. So a little bit on commissioning. We build these complicated buildings, and they don't always work right. And when they don't work right, we spend more money, and they're not as comfortable. So how do we recognize that commissioning is required under most codes, but it's not enforced? The health department certainly enforces the health code. The tax department certainly enforces the tax, but we don't tend to enforce some of the subtleties of our construction code, and commissioning is one of them because our systems aren't optimized and they don't work together well. Next slide. And what happens is a series of things. We have sloppy construction. This is more of an indoor air quality issue. We have panels where you can't do maintenance. We have curves that are too steep, so we're not getting the right flows. All these are causing static pressure buildup. They might be causing air leakage because of that. And then we've got no thermal continuous insulation if pipes are crossing over a metal fitting, for example. So these are all in the code, but they haven't really been put into practice. And it's a reminder that things like commissioning are required in LEED. It's a prerequisite. And it's a reminder that this is how we've begun to build buildings, is that we're codifying some of these things in ways that allows us to build a better building. So I want to shift a little bit and begin to wrap up. We all talk in carbon. There's good carbon and there's bad carbon. There's also operational carbon and embodied carbon. We forget about embodied carbon. It's the next thing. It's how we can build a better building. It's how we can become more regenerative. When you build a building, the concrete and the steel are the vast majority of the embodied carbon. Next slide. Go one more, the other direction. Keep going. The slide I want to describe is when we cross over from the amount of operational carbon we have in any given year versus the first time carbon that exists when we build the building or when we renovate it. The embodied carbon is about 7 years of operational carbon. So if we're focused on operational carbon, when does embodied carbon come next? We've got good tools to help us. We've got emerging technologies there. We've got 6-story timber frame buildings. We've got blue lamps happening. All those things are slightly better. But next slide. We're also seeing changes in the marketplace for carbon. So Tesla was a battery company, an electric company, a technology company, but it got a lot of revenue from selling its goodness into the compliance markets in Europe. Those compliance markets in Europe are still there. And because we're moving energy back and forth, because we're a global economy, those compliance markets are still being sought after. Tesla brings in $300 to $400 million a year just in selling its goodness in the compliance markets. The voluntary market in the US had a little bit of whiplash. We were going along pretty well, and then we had some policy changes, but it begins to be suggestive of what's happening in the future. I'll explain that. This was a slide I meant to talk about. It's new technology. Biomason is using algae to help with the conversion of cement into concrete. Carbon limit is adding an additive in that's causing the concrete to be as strong but with less of it. Waffle mat is a system that's using, in effect, plastic within the concrete to give the same strength with less. So all these things are happening in ways which we can reduce our embodied carbon.
You mean increase our embodied carbon?
No, to decrease the embodied carbon. So if you just did poured slab and you do one of those techniques, you will have decreased embodied carbon. You have less carbon in your cost of the building.
Oh.
So a couple of,
Can we follow up on that?
because this is right in your field.
Well, yeah, don't we want to sequester carbon into building materials?
We do. That's slightly different. That's the same idea. We might have carbon capture where we're trying to put it in wells. We're trying to make it into rock. That's a related component. I was talking about change of building technology that's allowing us to use less, which is different than carbon capture. Carbon sequestration is what we call it.
Okay.
So one is the element and the other is the emission.
Okay.
So here are the subtle things that give me pause. Those are the 4 reasons we have to be optimistic. The ITC really didn't go away as much as people thought. We have new technology. We have code in other places besides the federal government that are driving change. And we've got some new strategies in ocean, some of the carbon changing. But really what is interesting to me is that back to the regenerative curve is that the consumer, whether it be an individual or whether it be the institution, is beginning to be more thoughtful in what they want. So, for example, science-based initiatives are saying, don't worry so much about your scope 3 emissions. The market's taking care of that, just like the market's taking care of our e-grid emissions. So we're moving instead to focusing on how do we manage this touchy-feely offsets business to actually seeing change in the marketplace where the goodness is being demanded from the consumer or the other business that's bought from, and that's having impact on the whole strategy. We're also moving away from prescriptive certification programs to performance-based certification programs. The market's matured. We can build a net zero energy building. We don't just need to model it and earn the credits and talk about it theoretically. We can get to the point where we can build a net zero energy building for less money and have no operating cost. That day is here. It may not be in Pennsylvania, but we're seeing it in Connecticut. We're seeing it in other places where energy costs are higher and the megawatt has more value. So I can take some questions here for those that are online, and I'd be happy to take questions from any of you that are interested in continuing the conversation at Seven Sirens. There are a few snacks there. And if you use the word with the bartender of Stonehouse Group, I bet they'll give you one. So any questions from?
So first of all, okay. So
Are the questions online? Can you see any questions, Margaret?
Chat.
Okay. Had a couple questions along the way. Yes, sir.
One technology that I'm curious about that you didn't mention is the use of laminated wood and other wood building products in place of steel and concrete and so forth. I hear stories of, Norwegian skyscrapers and stuff like that. Is that happening? Is that an important thing now?
It is. The biggest building I've seen that was built that way was in Vancouver, and I believe it was 13 stories, and it was timber. So it is happening. The industry also needs to collect or correct for timber that was sustainably harvested. So it's got to be a two-prong approach. It's not just timber that was cut and not done sustainably. So there's a little bit of concern in that, but I do think that's happening in ways that technology is giving us better tools. Glue lambs are great.
It hasn't happened to a degree that you have projects involving it.
We don't, but I'm aware of one at Penn. The new engineering school at Penn is a timber frame construction. It's a commercial, industrial, large institutional building. It's done the right thing. Penn's engineering school is a timber frame building.
A lot of the townships have shifted to that.
Yes.
The newer buildings, a lot of the townships up in the country, theirs is all wood, pretty much.
Yeah, thank you.
So there's some of that happening.
So embodied carbon, something GBU, Green Building United, has talked about. I've talked there about it. It's almost its own evolving piece, but I wanted to give it as part of optimism because we're seeing the market change and demanding that. And if we're really focused on carbon, and that is how we define sustainability, then we can't just think about operation. We got to think about embodied. We have to think about transportation also, I would argue. But we're seeing regrowth of our cities. We're seeing penalties. So those are all reasons for being optimistic. But the central biggest reason is the increased cost of electricity. It will drive institutions and people to make changes when they see it on their bills. No one is measuring their KWH on a monthly basis. I know they're not. They're just looking at what their bill was. And when the bill starts going up 30, 40%, they'll start asking. When they start asking, there'll be solutions that will work even better because we have a BIPV roof, because we can use a battery, because we can do geo exchange, because we've got some really good policies. Pennsylvania is very good at net metering, for example.
I have a question related to greening of Pennsylvania. Is there some granular data somewhere that shows how much of that is renewables versus switching from coal to natural gas?
I'll put pressure on Margaret to see if she can pull up the current graphic that she and I looked at this afternoon that shows the fuel mix in Pennsylvania.
That would be great. The other question is, are utilities taking advantage of the battery opportunities to reduce their need for peaker power plants?
No, I don't see it at the utility level. I see it as incentives either coming from the grid operator or from the utilities to the consumer because they want it not at their stations, not at their power stations. They want it distributed. They want it out in the field. And that's shifting the market for batteries for what we call load shedding devices, whether that be a program that you take your BAS, you now know what that is.
I do now.
And you can say to the BAS, I want to set my load on a peak day. I'm going to pre-cool my air conditioning and I'm going to drop the temperatures. And then during the peak hours, I'm going to let it float. And people might get a little anxious, but systems probably aren't keeping up. So we can do load shedding in lots of different ways.
Getting back to air source heat pumps, have you found situations where if you do a dual fuel air source heat pump and natural gas furnace, does that become
Yes.
more efficient, or does it depend on the building, or?
There's some rules on the geo exchange tax credits that 75% of the energy over the year had to be produced by the geo well to approve for the credit. So the systems we're seeing that are going to get the credit are going to be 75%. That means that you're not having to put in the cost of the peak load with the new systems. You can use some of your old base loading machines, gas, for example, to help on the really cold day and still get the tax credit. So yes, we're seeing hybrid plants in lots of ways. We're seeing heat recovery chillers dropping hot water into a domestic loop, for example. We're seeing CHP, we're seeing heat pumps, not only boosting the temperature, but lowering the temperature. So yes, hybrid plants are absolutely that way, particularly at the bigger, more complicated places. Not seeing it at Lehigh, I saw it at Carleton, we're seeing it at Swarthmore, we're seeing it at Haverford.
That's more commercial and industrial, not residential, right?
So these are big campuses.
Right.
And when I talk to Maria, I want to be able to talk both residentially and commercial. I do owe you a question on confirming the residential tax credit.
I have another question.
Okay.
Data centers. So there's a lot of pushback from many different organizations saying the corporations that are building these data centers should pay for the power that's needed to run the data centers. And so that the consumer doesn't have to pay for that power. Do you see that happening, or is that unrealistic?
It tends to be utility by utility, municipality by municipality. And we know that they'll go where there's less resistance. Right? So the market's not reacting. The consumer protection markets, consumer protection organizations can't react fast enough. So even because there are certainly municipalities around here that have said no, but they'll just go elsewhere. And we're still sucking energy from the rest of the grid. So until everyone would make that change, we're still having the increased demand. And Pennsylvania is just prime for it because a data center, someone once explained to me, says we need 2 gigawatts of power and we need 400 acres. And Pennsylvania is pretty good at that. Power rate's already low, lots of land. And that's driving it. So I'm not optimistic that we'll get protections. And even if you were to look at the state level, there's a state initiative to be data center friendly because of economic development. So that's going to run right in the face of it.
You find that these data centers use the waste heat coming off the equipment well or not, or?
First, no, I don't. First of all, they're cooling all the time, even in the winter. And they're not even sophisticated enough in my mind from what I've seen to be using free cooling from outside when it's really, really cold out. I haven't seen it, in part because it's such a small part of their cost structure. It's like talking to energy at a hospital. Energy is a big item for all of us. It's not a big item for a hospital. Energy is a big item for all of us as consumers. It's just not in the data center calculation. I think it will come there. I think we'll see evolution of data center. One of our colleagues became energy certified for data centers because we're watching that, because we want to be able to play in that market.
Somewhere where you were talking about the heat pumps and you mentioned proper placement outside. What things do you take into consideration for that? Like, I understand how you face your building to get the sunlight in and that, but what's the right way to locate a heat pump?
So I may need to do a better job at finding that. So the heat pump itself, we can distribute it. We can run it 40, 50, 60 feet pretty easily. So what I think I meant to do was to say every building's application can be a little bit different, and where you locate the unit becomes part of the local the local calculus. So it doesn't matter from our point of view whether the heat pump itself is located on the north or south side of the building. It matters a lot if you wanted to do that BIPV roof, that you've got the ridges running the right direction. And it would make a lot of sense to have a deciduous tree and orient the big windows to the south with an overhang, right? This is just simple passive house principles. But on your question about the actual heat pump itself, we're not as concerned where it goes.
Okay. And I'll ask a dumb question since I don't understand heat pumps. I do have geothermal, so I understand how that works.
Your geo exchange.
Exchange, well, we never called it that before, so
Mm-hmm.
live on a large property and I was able to do long, big trenches.
You had a lateral system, a horizontal system?
Yeah, yeah, I have like 300-foot yard, whatever they are, very long trenches in my fields. I don't remember, it was like 8-10 feet or something like that. But now I'm doing a house to downsize onto a little 2-acre thing, so I'm probably going to do a heat pump. And I totally don't understand how a heat pump gets warm air in the winter when it's 0, or how it cools your house when it's 100 degrees outside. So I'm thinking, well, why would people, can you put them in your basement? Like where it's in a controlled environment?
It's what's called magic when you get the 300% efficiency, 400% efficiency.
Okay. Is there? Okay, I'll have to look at, I was just told it's like a refrigerator, but I don't really understand how that works either.
There's a good,
It has Freon in it?
yeah, there's a good This Old House video, like an 8-minute video that really explains
Okay.
that well, how you heat, how you sit in one direction, you uncondense it in the other direction. It's all about the refrigerant. If you get that down to a certain,
Yeah, so it's
it'll suck.
the Freon, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it can suck even out of 10 degrees there. So, yeah,
Magic, okay.
yeah,
You go with that.
fascinating.
You've been most kind. I'm happy to take more questions. Happy to go downstairs. Happy to call it a victory. Roger.
One of the things we talked about, and Larry put the commissioning slide up, you can install these efficient pieces of equipment, but in the end part, when you are having air leakage out of the ductwork, the poor construction, poor buildings, it's not really going to help with any energy efficiency. So we've had 2 colleagues in this company that actually did retrofits at their house, all brand new stuff. And the mechanical company that put in the ductwork, he observed leakage all over the place. We observed that in the commercial field. So again, Larry's comments of, it starts with the consumer, yourselves, us, to be your due diligence is to, if you're having a project being done at your home, look at it, make sure they're doing the work properly. We do all those observations in the field, and, we help out the owners that, we do the work for, and we help them out. But again, the bottom line is we can do all we can, but if you have air flowing all over that, not going to the right places, you're losing it. You really are.
That's for residential, that's where the blower door test, and that's where the utilities can help you sometimes with getting somebody to come in and do that test. They'll give you a relative measure of how porous your house is, so to speak, how much air leakage in and out of the house. And that's what they should be using to size these geo-exchange systems or heat pump systems or what have you. With really, heat pumps and geo-exchange they're both heat pumps. Just one is getting it from the earth, and one's getting it from the air. So it's the exchange is the same. But so by looking at that and getting that information, then that helps you with determining what size you need for the unit, but also how much work do you need to do to make your house tighter. And there'll be a talk on that in the fall, right?
Yeah.
We've been trying to get that subject matter. There are not a lot of people who work in this area, and it's not very well organized, and so It's hard to find people who can do it, and it's hard to find people who can do it who will be responsible about what they tell you and do a good job afterwards. We did that really well on the when we remediated some low-cost housing and so on. We had groups like in Easton, they went from house to house to house, just going down the street doing deep retrofits of buildings, but we're not. It's not part of the mainstream of what people do, so it's a little hard to do, but you can do it, and there are resources, and we, depending on what utility territory you're in, contact them and they can give you some names and a place to start.
So I think these break into categories. It's how the new technology works, the magic. And it's if we have new technology and we still haven't done it right, to Roger's point, Phil's point, we haven't moved ourselves forward. So as we make our buildings more complicated, then we also need to cross-check to make sure that we're doing them correctly. Because you can do all these things, and if you haven't optimized, you've got one wire wired the wrong direction and the valve is opening when it's supposed to be closing, then it all goes out the window. But I'd like to end by reminding you why we're optimistic. We're optimistic because we have new technology, because we've got a slow setting ITC, because we've got code that's shifting, we've got markets that's shifting. And as that happens, we are becoming more sustainable, and we are having policy that's subtle, that's changing the grid itself. And when those things happen, we all become better as we move towards decarbonization through that original arrow I showed. We have all the tools to become more decarbonized. And when we become more decarbonized, I think that's the definition of sustainability. And the thing about why you're here is that it takes forever to get there. And there'll be new tools and there'll be new trials and there'll be new thoughts next year. And we'll be able to continue to move along that trajectory towards becoming more regenerative.
Thank you. Thank you, Larry.